Hello. When I was younger, I was often asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Doctor, lawyer, and priest were all ideal answers to this question where I come from. My selection of veterinarian, which came fairly early on, was doctor adjacent and therefore acceptable, although a little fringe, but we can live with that. That's all right. My career is in seeing, affirming, validating, and celebrating the identities of others in our current sociocultural context. That's a mouthful. That does not fit neatly onto a LinkedIn page. It is not readily searchable. In fact, it's not even one of the things in the drop-down menu when you're looking for your job title and you're trying to put it in there. It doesn't fit. You can't have it. You have to write it in. No one can figure it out. But that's what I do, and I do this in a variety of different ways. Let's back up. When I was younger, frankly, when I wasn't so much younger than I am right now, I did not feel like I fit. I didn't feel like anyone wanted me. It felt like what was wanted was for me to become something that people could want. And to do this, there was a linear path. There was one direction to go, and I needed at the end of that one direction to have found and accomplished something that fit very neatly into a box. The question, what will you be when you grow up, persisted. In high school, this question recurred over and over and over again with more urgency as college loomed on the horizon. There was some nuance added. For example, I was offered the oft-quoted but extremely contextless snippet of the Mary Oliver poem and asked, "What will you do with your one wild and precious life?" And though I have read the entire poem, we were expected to focus on the oneness and the precious life. I am lucky. I am educated. I have been given enormous amounts of privilege, power, resources, and I better make something good. When I was an adolescent, two things really came to a head for me. The first was an intense sense of identity dislocation. I didn't understand until I was 17 years old that this is because I'm a transgender man, and though I was extremely fortunate that my gender was not particularly policed when I was a kid, I had a long way to go before I felt seen, validated, understood, and definitely a long way to go before I felt celebrated. The other was that I'm much, much better at the other part of the Mary Oliver poem because, as she writes, I do know how to pay attention. I know how to fall down into the grass, to kneel in the grass. I know how to be idle and blessed. I know how to stroll through the fields. And that's what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? And I was told. I was told exactly what I should do, and what I should do is get on a collegiate track, and that collegiate track should be single-minded, and that collegiate track that is single-minded should be solely focused on a destination, and that destination should have an intelligible job title, and that intelligible job title should be something that I can neatly build upon in a continuous linear stack until I achieve, I assume, godhood. Being a transgender man is just one part of my identity. But in helping myself to understand that component of my identity, to affirm it, and to actualize it in the world, I learned a lot, actually, about what I want to do when I grow up, and also what will I do with my one wild and precious life. The other thing that I noticed was that I had thought all along that this sense of interest in multiple avenues and a diversion from this single linear path was my own, and it turns out that's not the case at all. Both of my parents are polymaths, and I find that my interest in the multitudes is actually inherited. When I came to my mother and said, "Help me to find a name that reflects my identity," my mother, who is a bankruptcy lawyer, and an anime aficionado, and a scholar of ancient languages, and a linguist, and a biblical scholar, and a figure skater, and a cosplayer, and someone who does the Sunday New York Times crossword puzzle in pen casually while having a lengthy conversation about ancient civilizations, selected for me a name in Welsh from the early hundreds CE, and I can't think of any other name fitting me better. When I arrived at Colorado State University in 2006, I was on much better ground than I had ever been before in terms of understanding who I am as a person. But I also brought with me this idea of the one. What are you going to do when you grow up? What will you do with your one wild and precious life? So, I enrolled as wildlife biology major, and I joined the pre-veterinary club. Okay, on track, veterinarian, doctor adjacent. We're going for it. We're doing it. Halfway through my first semester, I decided to add an art major because I wanted to carve out some time to make art, which had always been an important part of my life. And the only way you can do that here at CSU, or at least the only way that I could figure out how to do it, was to declare a major. So I wasn't losing my focus. I had my one, I had my direction. I was still going there. I just wanted to do that also as a side thing. I drove to Denver about 4 times a week to train in Taekwondo because I've been doing martial arts since I was very, very young, and I wanted to continue doing that. And actually, I was wondering if maybe that would be the one, and I went pretty far down the rabbit hole trying to figure out, is this what I'm going to do when I grow up? But actually, I am extremely focused. Don't worry. Don't be afraid. I graduated directly into the recession. Very nice. And took a job in Boulder working at a loom and spinning wheel factory, building fine wood instruments for creating textile art. Because, did I not mention, while I was in the art department focused, I became enamored, though my background is largely in illustration, I became fascinated with textile arts, with the art of weaving, with surface design, with all of these pieces. And to be honest, I was a little bit proud of myself because, look, job at loom and spinning wheel factory, fiber arts background, there's a connection. It's almost as if I'm starting to go in a direction. So that's fine, and we don't need to pay attention to the fact that I also have several other jobs, including teaching Taekwondo, but I'm focused on my one thing. A shattered ankle in 2012 put a stop to my Taekwondo, at least for the time being, and I did what many people my age decided to do at the time, and I said to myself, I will go to graduate school, and this will fix not only my income problem, but that's probably where the one thing has been hiding all along. This is what I should do. And so I returned to CSU, this time to pursue my master's in fine art. And what I ended up doing, much to my chagrin, because frankly, I set out to do something very different, was create an artwork that was entirely about identity, about the ways in which art can be identity affirmation, celebration, the ways in which it can communicate things about identity that are far beyond words. The idea started with me thinking to myself, what if I took some of these self-portraits that I've been doing that have all of these animal and plant components, these kind of chimeras, and what if I drew them on these panels of silk organza, which are translucent? I really loved that semi-transparency. At the time, I was obsessed with the idea of the liminal space, the transitional spaces between locations, people, places, things, time periods, all of these different pieces. Part of that, perhaps, being my journey as a transgender person. Also, being somebody who, though I attempt, seems to have a little bit of trouble focusing on my one. I'm moving through and in and out all the time. And also as somebody who, though I did not end up, at least not so far, having a career in anything like wildlife biology or veterinary medicine, I still have a deep and passionate love of the natural world. And nowhere else can we find more transitional liminal spaces than all around us in living things, because we are never in stasis. We never stop. What started as an experiment ended up being 175 illustrated panels of silk, which I installed using glass rods and silk yarn in a glass-walled gallery, and I invited participants to walk through and experience the fabric very, very close. And what I noticed as I watched this video for the first time was that when people walked through the space, the images interacted with their body, almost as if they had a tattoo. And I learned a little something more about what I might do when I grow up. After graduate school, I moved to Boston, where my wife was pursuing her graduate study. 420 applications later, I had not a single job offer in anything, much less the arts. Nothing in art, nothing in anything art adjacent, nothing in any of the so-called creative professions. I had a really nice card with a hokusai print from one person who interviewed me and said no, but they sent a card. It was the sweetest rejection I've ever had. And I was really dispirited. Had I not focused, had I not gotten a master's in the thing that I was trying to get employment in, this made sense, a linear path. But no, I was very sad. Through a series of happy accidents, I ended up finding myself working as the transgender health program manager at Fenway Health. I would go on to hold several roles at Fenway Health and around Boston, all of which had to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. Because, had I not mentioned, I've been working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space in some capacity since late high school, and it turned out that that resume actually stood me in better stead when I arrived in Boston than my formal credentials. So off I went. But there was this intense internal battle. Part of my brain was telling me, you have failed. You were asked, and you were asked over and over and over again, what one thing will you do when you grow up? What one thing will you do with your one wild and precious life? One, linear, focus. You're not doing it. You've got 3 jobs. None of them are in what you studied. What are you doing? And it wasn't until 4 years into the work that I discovered I'm doing exactly what I am supposed to be doing. Every day, I bring my creative mind to my work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Every day, I bring what I learned about critical analysis to bear, regardless of what job it is I happen to be doing in the moment. And as I started to understand this about myself, I realized that for me, there is no one, but rather a bedrock, a foundation, and a continual thread that pulls all of the seemingly disparate pieces of what I do together, including my identity. With this discovery, I felt extraordinarily liberated. And I would invite you all to start to reject the notion that you have to answer the question, what will you be when you grow up? Or what will you do with your one wild and precious life? And think instead, what matters to you? Why does it matter to you? What makes you feel connected to the world? What does that look like? The world wants to put you in a box, and it wants you to check a box for each part of your identity. Please select one gender. Please select one race. Please select one religion. And please select one job title. And please make it intelligible. And please make it so that when we have a drop-down menu on LinkedIn, you can find your profession, you can locate it, and that way, when we use the little algorithm to search for you, you pop right up because I really don't want to have to work to think about who it is you actually are and what you have to offer. I just want to be able to search for you easily. Okay, thanks. You don't have to acquiesce to any of these demands. When we decide that we are going to be more than one thing, we do not increase incrementally, but exponentially. The other thing that happened when I started to lean into this way of being was that suddenly people were asking for me. People wanted me on their team. People wanted to know, what can I do in my role? Many people who felt like inside of their role, they couldn't do the things they wanted to do because their role was so finite and limited. And my answer to most folks who I talk to when I'm asked the question, what can I do to change this, is we're going to have to break some stuff. Today I have 3-ish jobs. I started a consulting firm that focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice topics called Diversity Consulting, Inc. And in this work, I work with a lot of healthcare spaces. I also work with a lot of folks in higher education. And I push them to contest the idea of a single idea, and also to contest the idea that any word that we use for one singular identity means one thing from person to person, but rather to think about how can we understand each person in front of us as an individual, as a whole human. I own a small tattoo shop down here in Old Town where I'm very privileged to help people ornament themselves using one of the most ancient forms of art that human beings have engaged in, and to celebrate parts of their history through body ornamentation and art. I love listening to people's stories as I perform this, what I think of as sacred art of tattooing. And I get to make art for a living. Do you know how many people get to say that? Not very many people get to say that. I get to make art for a living. Oh my goodness. And I'm also really privileged to be able to teach a course in fiber art here at Colorado State University. Art has been extremely important for me in understanding myself, in understanding the world, and bridging the gaps between communication about who I am and also understanding who other people are. And one of the things that I relish is the opportunity to invite students to learn how are they going to express themselves? What do they want me to know? And what can they do to communicate that using art? I learned that what I will be when I grow up is anything and everything. My father always told me, you can do anything, just not all today. And I really believe that now. I feel like I can be those things that I just described to you, and it doesn't matter if tomorrow suddenly I decide to do something different. We can be more than our title. We can be more than a single linear path. I learned that what I will do with my one wild and precious life is I will celebrate people's identity. I will help people affirm their identity and understand what it means to be in the world based on what they have told me about what's important to them, and that can take many different shapes and forms. I learned that what I will do with my one wild and precious life is lean into the wild part and the precious part, and I will leave the one further and further behind. Thank you.